Welcome back to the Aubergine Chef. Today we'll be making something easy, pumpkin scones. Let's go ahead and just get right into the ingredients. Now this recipe makes 32 scones. There's a smaller recipe that makes 16 scones if you want to use that. The recipe will be available for download on my website, www.theauberginechef.com. So on your electric mixer, you want to combine the dry ingredients. 1 pound, 6.5 ounces of all-purpose flour, 12 ounces of granulated sugar, 1 ounce of baking powder, 6 grams of salt, and 4 grams of pumpkin pie spice. Now, I use pumpkin pie spice because it kind of takes the thought process out of it, but of course you can make your own spice blend using cinnamon, nutmeg, clove, ginger, whatever your heart desires. Then you want to whisk together 3 ounces of heavy cream, 2 eggs, 2 whole eggs, and 9 ounces of pumpkin puree, which just comes in the can. And you don't want to really whip any air into it. You just want to make sure it's a homogeneous solution. Just stir it all together. You also want to have 6 ounces of unsalted butter cut into cubes, and you want to keep that cold. So cut it up in cubes, put it back in the refrigerator, and then weigh out the rest of your ingredients. You also want to have 5 ounces of whole pumpkin seeds, also called pepitas, and you want to toast them in the oven. So you want to do about 8 to 10 minutes at 400 degrees on a sheet pan, just until they just turn lightly brown and get a little bit more flavor to them. It helps develop their flavor. Pumpkin seeds are optional, but I highly recommend it because I feel like this scone is kind of bland without the pumpkin seeds. And then we're also going to combine a little bit of powdered sugar and whole milk for a glaze. Now, it kind of just depends on how many you make, and I'll explain why I'm saying you won't make all 32, because what we're going to end up doing is freezing most of the dough. And I'll show you when we get to that point. So the first thing you want to do is combine all of your dry ingredients on your electric mixer and stir it with a paddle attachment until all the ingredients are really well blended. And you want to make sure to do this. It's very, very important because you're not really going to be mixing it a whole lot once you add the butter. Well, you are, because you're going to cut in the butter. But it's really, really important that you get all your ingredients mixed up really well in the beginning, all your dry ingredients, because you don't want one pocket of the scones to have a really strong cinnamon flavor or pumpkin spice flavor, and then another part have almost no flavor at all. So you want to make sure that all your spices are really well blended in the beginning. Alright, so after you've blended your dry ingredients together, remember this is flour, sugar, baking powder, spices, and salt, you want to go ahead and add in your 6 ounces of butter that's been cubed. And now you can also do this by hand, and it actually might be easier to do this by hand, especially if you're making a small batch, because what you want to do is cut it in. And we're going to be using the paddle attachment to cut it in, which isn't super efficient at doing it, but it does take the pressure off of you having to do it yourself. What we're going to do is we're going to blend it in until it resembles coarse sand. Again, we're basically just cutting it in. If you were going to cut it in by hand, you would use like a knife, or I usually use a bench scraper, and you just keep cutting, literally cutting it in, pushing up and down with the bench scraper. But anyway, we're just going to go ahead and let this mix. Alright, after your butter is cut in, you want to go ahead and add in your pumpkin puree, heavy cream, and egg mixture all at once. And then you want to mix it on low speed until it's just combined. Alright, and then lastly, you want to go ahead and add in all of your whole pumpkin seeds or pepitas, and just mix that in until just combined. Okay, so once you get it off the mixer, you're going to want to go ahead and mix it a little bit by hand, just gentle kneading, because a lot of the dry ingredients have settled to the bottom, and it's just not one of those things that you can easily just scrape the sides of the bowl. So just make sure those are nice and kneaded in. Okay, and then you want to bring the ball of dough over to a lightly floured surface, and then kind of shape it into a log. Okay, and then what you want to do is you want to divide it into 8 pieces. So in half again, and then each piece in half. And then you want to take each of these pieces and then form them into a disc using flour if you need it. You don't want to go too heavy on the flour because a lot of the flour won't get worked off. And the disc is fairly small. So if you want to change the size of your scones, feel free to. I like this size. I think it's a decent size. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to wrap this with plastic wrap, and then I'm going to freeze it. And then that way, this makes 4 scones. You can cut it into quarters. It makes 4 scones, and that way, while you're freezing it, you can have fresh scones as you need it. So that way you're not baking them all at once. Alright, and like I said, when you're ready to bake, you can just cut it however you want. I like to cut mine into quarters. And we're going to put this on the sheet pan, and we're going to bake it from between 375 to 400 for about 14 minutes. I'm going to check it in 10 and see how it looks. Now these guys puff up a lot, but even though they puff up, they are still easy to separate. So you can put them a little bit closer if you're doing more than just 4. But like I said, by putting it in the freezer in those little discs, you can bake them off as you want them. Okay, so our scones came out of the oven, and I've let them cool off completely. Now keep in mind that the darks on these scones the bottom of these scones get pretty dark really quickly, so you want to make sure you keep an eye on, especially that 10-minute mark. If you need to, double pan the sheet pan, but what I like to do is I like to bake it in the upper third of my oven, and I always have an empty sheet pan in my oven, or I try to, if I'm not baking more than 1 sheet tray. Alright, so we're going to go ahead and make the glaze for our pumpkin scones. I've had about 1 ounce of powdered sugar. This is probably way more than we're going to need, but you know, we have to make a little bit more in this case because we're not making that many. Now remember that if you want to make more, you'll increase it. This is going to be enough to glaze these 4, and you'll see how much it makes. We're just going to add not even like 1/4 ounce of milk, and we probably won't even need a little bit more, but all we're doing is we're going to make a really thick, almost royal icing like glaze. So if it's not really thick, we're going to have to add more powdered sugar. Okay, and you just want to keep going back and forth with the powdered sugar and the whole milk until you get about this kind of consistency. It should be pretty heavy, pretty thick. Could be even a little bit thicker than this, really. Okay, go ahead and scoop the mixture into a piping bag, and then you're just going to go ahead and glaze your scones. Alright, and that's pretty much it. So and as these scones sit out at room temperature, or I guess if you want to package them up, the icing is going to get harder and harder and harder to the point where you can actually touch it and it won't like leave an imprint. And that's the point where you can go ahead and stack your scones. Alright, so that's how you make pumpkin scones. I hope you learned a lot today. Thank you for watching, and remember, the Aubergine chef demystifying dessert one recipe at a time.